Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of our What's New in Prisma live stream. Today I'm here with my colleague Alex. Alex, how are you doing today?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing great. I'm also excited. This is the first What's New in Prisma I've co-hosted with someone, so it's pretty exciting.
Exactly. I think you've been here on the stream a few times already, though, right? I think you have been here as a guest like pretty much a year ago during the holiday special when you first started working here, right?
Yes, there was that instance during the holiday special, and I think sometime in March when we were going through the type GraphQL article with the type GraphQL CRUD generator as well. But I've
Right.
also
And you gave a demo of
hosted,
this one.
yes, but I feel familiar with this platform because I've also hosted a few other meetups. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, we are like streaming this with StreamYard, and you have been in the backstage area a couple of times and have been the person that's arranging everything in the background. So you know how everything works. You're familiar with everything. So that's great.
Yes.
Cool. It's great to have you as a co-host as well, Alex. I'm very excited about this. And today we have a few topics that we want to cover together. So, of course, as it's tradition in this show, we are going to talk about the release that happened this week. And this week, this was version 3.4. And there are a few things that we want to talk about there. I think you also prepared a little bit of a demo that we're going to see and talk about. Then we'll have a guest on today's stream. Actually, we'll have two guests, but the first one is Michael, who built a tool called the Prismaliser. And we'll talk about what that is and how it works. Then we'll also talk about the upcoming Serverless Data Conference that we're hosting here at Prisma. And then at the end, we'll also talk to a new colleague of ours. Again, a woman that has joined our documentation team after we talked to Tana 2 weeks ago. This week, we're joined by Lucy, who is our new documentation writer. So I'm very excited to talk to our guests today. And in the end, I think we'll have a bit of time for Q&A. So everybody who's watching right now, make sure to drop your questions in the comments so that we can pick them up at the end of the stream. All right, Alex, I think we are already good to go to start talking about this week's release. And I'm going to share my screen for that. And we are going to look at the release notes together. So let me quickly figure that out here. Share screen and put it up. There we go. This is the Prisma repo, and we see that the 3.4 release happened 2 days ago. So let's walk through the release notes and see what is new this week. So first of all, we have now support for Postgres 14. I'm actually not super familiar with the Postgres releases, so I can't really tell anyone what's new about that. But if you have been using Postgres 14, then now the good news is that we are also compatible with that. Then we are continuing our work on improving the MongoDB connector, slowly driving it towards in general availability. So just as a reminder, at the moment, the MongoDB connector is still in preview, which means it's not recommended to be used in production. But nonetheless, we want a lot of people to try it out already. You can use it in a hobby project. You can just use it to play around. That helps us, and the feedback that you provide help us to smoothen out the remaining issues and making it ready for prime time sooner. So what is new in the MongoDB connector? We now support the order by aggregate group, in MongoDB as well. So this has been available in relational databases for a while already. We have been demoing this here on the stream as well. So if you're curious, then you can find the release where that happened and then the respective What's New in Prisma episode if you want to see the demo of that. Here is a quick look what the API looks like for this. And then, of course, we also have more in-depth documentation that shows how this works exactly. So if you have an API call like this, you would get the results of your query grouped by city right here. And you can also include the cities count like this. Then we have the initial support for MongoDB okay, this is a small typo, actually my bad, because I do the polishing of the release notes. Initial support for PrismaDB push in MongoDB. And we'll talk about this actually in a bit because that's where you prepared the demo for, Alex. I don't think we have to talk about it now. Let's just come back to it. But first, take a look at the rest of the release notes. We have a first version ready of the MongoDB introspection that I demoed on the stream, I think, I'm not sure if it was in the last episode or even in the one before. I think maybe already the one before. I showed how to use introspection in MongoDB, but we're expanding the functionality of the introspection by also working with embedded documents. This hasn't been released yet, but or actually, yes, we packaged the first iteration in the CLI. I thought that people still had to enable this explicitly, but no, this is now also part of the MongoDB preview feature. So this should come out of the box. So when you now introspect your MongoDB database with Prisma, then it'll recognize embedded documents on your collections as well. Then there is Prisma Client Go, of course. Sometimes people forget that we build Prisma Client also for other languages, and Golang is the first one here. And in the releases, of course, we also include the news that we have on that front. And one big new feature is that Prisma Client Go now also supports the data proxy. We have an example here. Here is how you can enable it. And Prisma Client Go now also supports the filtering of JSON types. All right, I think that's it for the very quick overview. So let's come back to the topic of PrismaDB push in MongoDB. So maybe, Alex, you can very quickly describe what the PrismaDB push command usually does with relational databases, and then we can talk about what it does now in the context of MongoDB, because that might be confusing for some people, what they expect this command to do in Mongo.
Yeah, sure. So with relational databases, what DB push does is it generates SQL in memory and then applies the SQL sort of migration against the database. But with MongoDB, it's sort of a weird situation because MongoDB is schemaless. So you don't really have something that's consistent, really. So with this, the support for the unique and index annotations, which are attributes, are natively supported. So if you do have these attributes in your Prisma schema and you introspect your database, well, of course, it has to have data. So it will be able to annotate these fields in your schema. So yes.
Exactly. So I think the important point there is that with relational databases, what PrismaDB push does, it just syncs your Prisma schema directly with your database schema. So it actually just goes and runs a migration against your database, but it doesn't generate any migration files on your file system. And exactly as you mentioned, Alex, with MongoDB, there is no schema. So what would PrismaDB push do in that context? if there now is no schema that can even be synced with the Prisma schema. So no schema in the database that can be synced with the Prisma schema. Well, it's not quite that MongoDB has no schema features at all. It has this one schema feature of indexes, and this is something that we can still represent in the Prisma schema as well. So the only thing PrismaDB push really does in the context of MongoDB is it's syncing unique and index annotations against the database and is putting them into MongoDB. That's all PrismaDB push does. So it's not persisting any kind of schema state in the database or generating migration files, really none of that, because the schemaless nature of MongoDB doesn't permit that. All right, Alex, then I think maybe I can hand it over to you, and you can go and share your screen and show us the demo.
Cool. So this is the example that is in the release notes, where we have one model and the ID, which is of course DB generated. I think I ran into an issue when using Studio there, that I left out the DB generated, so Studio could not save the new value without an ID. I resolved that. Yeah. So
yeah, and the reason, like, maybe we can also like quickly say that I think the reason why you need DB generated here is because we don't have another way to represent the default value that's being inserted by MongoDB, and the value is always just generated by the database itself, because this underscore ID field that any document in any MongoDB database has, it really is a strong limitation of like MongoDB, that any document always has to have this underscore ID field, and it's always generated by MongoDB itself. It's of type object ID, and you can't get around it. And the way how we represent it in the Prisma schema is by using the @default with the @db generated function inside.
Yes. So in this example, we'll first check MongoDB Compass. I keep confusing Compass and Atlas for some reason. As you can see, there is no database, and in my environment variables, it's called the database or collection. It keeps getting confusing. It's called Prisma Mongo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're using a local instance of MongoDB here.
Yes, using Docker in this example. So in this example, we are specifying that the author, we are adding an index to the title field and a unique constraint to the author, and which meaning to the author and title. So what this means is that an author can't have more than one post with the same title, but you can have more than one post by multiple authors. I hope that clears things up, because it's a little bit challenging to wrap your head around it. Yes.
Exactly. So you can have basically two blog posts that have the same title, but then they have to have a different author, or you can have two blog posts with the same author, but then they have to have a different title.
Yes, exactly. So I'll go ahead and run PrismaDB push, and it should log some output about what it's done. Let's give it a moment. This is where we pray to the demo gods. Nothing fails. Yes. So yeah, as we can see, it's created the collection and also the index on the title, as well as a unique index on the author and title. So if we go over back to Compass, yes, and refresh this, we'll see that the new database was added. So let's look into it. Nothing's happening when I'm clicking it.
Maybe Compass is just a little bit overwhelmed with everything that's going on here.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So we have
yes.
the new Prisma Mongo database, and in there, the new collection that you defined, which is the Prisma model from your Prisma schema.
Yes, and if we go over to the indexes tab, we'll now see that there is an index applied to title as well as a composite index as well, which is a combination of two fields, which is author and title here. Yes, so if we go ahead and create a document, insert a document, so we'll go with title, which is, I hope I have something in my clipboard, which is Prisma and MongoDB. And then I'll go ahead and add an author who is Nicholas. And then I'll go ahead and click insert.
Well, I would never write such a blog post.
That's still okay. It's still been published anyway. So in this case, if we try to add the same sort of data title, which is paste that back, and author should be getting an error. Seems odd. Yeah, I spotted that. Insert is not permitted while document contains errors. I think this is because we now have the title having, or rather the unique constraint that we applied. I'm not sure if there's an error missing here.
It could be like the last trailing comma, maybe, if it's pure,
yeah.
if it's pure JSON. Yeah, there you go. So
And
it was
then
more of a syntax error at this point.
Oh yeah, it's
Now if you
JSON
try to
here.
insert,
We get the error that states that duplicate key error collection on blog post title author should be unique. So we'd have to change the title in this case, or
right.
the author.
So
Yes.
we did violate this unique constraint that we both tried to explain before, that you are not allowed to have two documents, two posts with the same title and the same author.
Yes. So we can go ahead and cancel this and now clear whatever's inside our Prisma schema. And if we introspect, it should regenerate everything that we set up. So npx Prisma db pull, and crossing my fingers. Yes, and everything is exactly as we stated it. So the other database attribute functions are not yet supported, but at least these two are mapped to the actual MongoDB native database types. So yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Very, very nice. Cool. That was a great demo, Alex, and gave us a great overview of the new feature there and the functionality of PrismaDB push in the context of MongoDB, which again is very different than how it works with a relational database. So yeah, let's move on to our next agenda item for today, and that is the cool tool Prismaliser that we have found, and that has been built by Michael. So let's bring Michael onto the stream. Here we go.
Hey there.
Hey, Michael. Great to see you here.
Great to see you too. Great to be here.
All right, Michael. So first of all, I want to mention that you're based in Australia, and it's right now, I think, 3 a.m., 3:20 for you. So first of all, huge thank you that you're staying up that long for us and that you're willing to chat with us here on the stream.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to be here. Like, it's not every day you get an invitation to be on the stream for this random tool you just had the inspiration one day to make. So yeah.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, Michael, if you want, please like tell us a little bit about your background maybe, and introduce yourself to the viewers, who you are, and then yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about how you became aware of Prisma and your journey there.
Yeah. So I'm Michael. I'm an Australian-based JavaScript developer. I've been participating in the open source scene for about 5 or 6 years now. I started while I was still in high school, just as a sort of thing to pass the time. And I started with making bots for Discord. I had joined them right around the time they were starting like the first phase of their open API for bots and all that. So I sort
Oh
of
wow.
got in on that and just sort of dabbled around with initially with Lua actually, and love it.
Ooh.
But then sort of someone in a server was like, "Hey, I'm doing this thing in Node.js. Do you want to help?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And
The
basically
famous
just
last words.
yeah. So and then I've just been working on like hobby open source stuff pretty much till this day, and now it's now doing JavaScript is sort of my job.
Oh wow. And yeah, how did you first come across Prisma?
Yeah, so I was doing a project for a client when I was doing freelance for a bit. So it was a Next.js application because they wanted all this React sort of interactions, and it needed a database. And I was trying to get it working. I initially used Typeform,
Mhm.
which was like the only one I pretty much knew of at that point.
Mhm.
And this was when I was like pretty deep into TypeScript. So like I want types, Typeform seems the way to go. But I had sort of issues of getting it to work, like getting Next to find the config and having it all transpiled correctly. It just was weird. And then a bit after, I found MicroOrm, which seemed to be like a lighter version of Typeform, but I
Mhm.
still sort of had the same issues with it. And then a couple days into the project, one of my friends just sort of shared this Prisma.io link in the chat, just like, this looks pretty cool. And I took a brief look at it, had the same thought, took a deeper look into like the schema and the client, and it was love at first sight.
That's great to hear. And really, out of curiosity, like, do you recall when that was? About what time?
It was around November last year.
Okay, about a year ago. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's always interesting to learn kind of when people have learned about us, what their context is, because I've been around so long and we have changed so much that like it gives me a good kind of picture of your understanding of where we are, like when you joined basically. But yeah, like that was a pretty good time to join already, even though we didn't have Prisma Migrate ready at that point,
Yeah.
right? It was just before we launched, I think, even the preview of Prisma Migrate. I think that came a little bit
Yeah.
later after you had then probably heard of it first.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very nice.
Migrate thankfully came pretty like early-ish into that project, so I wasn't too lost with that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, since that was kind of the most requested feature in our community for a long time, that really desperately wanted to have a solution for migrations as well. And yeah, it was also a big relief for us that we could finally give it to them. So glad that you could also benefit from that then. So what did you build with Prisma since you came across it?
Yeah, so beyond that initial client application, so there's just been some small stuff, like some Discord bots I think I've used with it, although I like left that like ages ago. Just personal,
Okay.
not finding much fun with that. But yeah, been using it for like work stuff using Next. It's just like my go-to database, I guess, ecosystem for Node.js at this point, just because it's so easy to work with. And then there's this link shortener I made called Selwyn, which is really, really still like in progress. Like there's some UI stuff I need to do. But basically it's this supposed to be really dead simple redirection service, and I actually used it in one of my the tweet that sort of got me onto here. I use it myself on ov.sh. So I'm sort of dog fooding that, and it's been really nice to work with Prisma and that. And then, of course, more recently, Prismaliser.
That sounds great. Yeah, so the Prismaliser is a tool that, for me personally, I only became aware of it, I think, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. But I actually saw that it had been shared internally in our Slack already over the summer. And like I was on sabbatical over the summer for 3 months, so I wasn't aware of it. But when I found it, I actually just like searched internally in our Slack for the term Prismaliser, and then I saw that it was already shared, I think, internally by Daniel or so once in was it July when you launched it? Or
Yeah,
August?
it was around July.
Okay, yeah,
July,
exactly.
August,
So
sort of.
we had been aware of it already, and now that I've been back, I thought, okay, it makes sense to maybe bring you on the show, because we've actually talked about some of these like Prisma, like modeling, like visualization tools already in on the stream here, because there were at least 2 of them already that you can use to do that. But both of them work differently. Both of them are generators that you include in your Prisma schema, and that then will kind of generate the EDML in one case, and I think in the other case it's UML that you can then put into visualizing tools. But like none of these are browser based yet. So the browser based one, I think, is just the most convenient one, and it's always nice to see these kinds of tools pop up in the ecosystem. And with this format here, with What's New in Prisma, it's also great that we have the opportunity to feature the people who work on these tools. So that's why we brought you on to talk about it. Yeah, out of curiosity, how long did it take you to build this?
It's hard to say. Like it was an on and off hobby stuff while I was working through my job. But I think I came up with the idea initially like around the end of April this year. Because initially one of my friends showed off this library for React called React Flow. It's basically this like interactable graph viz sort of stuff, and you can make your own nodes and connections, and it's actually pretty cool and smooth. So when they posted that, I just took a brief glimpse at it, and I'm like, I could make something with this. And then a couple of days after, I'm like, I might be able to do something with Prisma, because I was having some issues with like this database schema that was just SQL, and it had gone out of control. So I kind of wanted this tool to like bring it into Prisma, recontextualize everything, see if I can clean it up a bit. I actually never got around to doing that, funnily enough. But it sort of was the seed for this idea. So I worked about it slowly, and then like took like some weeks hiatus off it, just because work was busy, and sometimes you get like that burst of energy at the start of a project, and then you just forget about it. It's just like, oh yeah, that exists.
Fair enough, yeah.
And then so around like mid-July, I'm like, I should probably finish this and like make it pretty for public release. And so I did that, and then yeah, around July I launched it, and then this past weekend actually, I think Alex actually opened an issue on the repository about shareable links, just out of the blue, and that was actually on my roadmap for what I wanted to do with the project at some point. But I sort of put development on that just like on a hold, because I recently got a full-time job at that point, so that was like taking up quite a bit of my time. And then I just saw this issue as like, I should probably get around to doing that. So Saturday and Sunday, I pretty much just worked on that feature and like got it out like really quickly, and then I made the tweet like right after, and here I am.
All right. Yeah, I think we have talked so much about the tool now that we should show people what it actually looks like. Do you want to share your screen, Michael, or would you want me to show it maybe?
Yeah, I'll show it off.
All right. Then if you find the option to share your screen here in StreamYard, we can put it up. There you go.
All right. So for anyone unfamiliar, this is Prismaliser. It's just a text editor, which is actually using Monaco, same base as Visual Studio Code, which is cool because it has the text highlighting. And then you have this interactable sort of graph area where you can zoom in, move about. You can even, I don't know what that button does. Or you can here, and then you can also drag the nodes about, which is really cool, and it's like an out of the box feature with what I'm using.
So, from like React Flow, I guess then.
Yeah, so it's like I don't need to do anything. I can just drag these around, and it just handles it for me, and even like that, which is cool. So yeah, so I got format support because need that.
All right.
And so yeah.
And like, can you explain what the little little kind of like characters mean on the connection of the relations on author and post?
Yeah. So I got this from like IT class like years ago when we were doing like some database stuff. And it's about relationships and like their numerality, I guess. So this arrow sort of inversed represents a many relation, and then the line over here represents a one relation. So it's so in this case it's a many to one or one to many, depending on how you look at it.
Nice. And you even annotate the arrow with the name of the relation in this case, right?
Yeah.
Which is actually implicit in the Prisma schema. So you don't have to like spell it out, but it would be the third attribute or the third argument inside the relation attribute, right?
I actually do support naming them as well. So if I go posts, maybe it's the first one actually. I actually haven't used these myself, but I was fiddling in the docs and I saw that was a thing. So
yeah, I'm also surprised why it complains about this.
I think I have to. Do I have to?
No, that doesn't make any. That doesn't make any sense. You should be. You have to. If you specify the name on one side, you also have to like put it on the other side.
Yeah,
that's it. Got it.
So then it reflects over here.
And perfect.
Use the posts.
Right. And like, in fact, this is important, this feature with the naming of a relation when you need to disambiguate relations. If you have multiple relations between user and post, which maybe in this example wouldn't make much sense, but there are examples in data modeling where you have the situation where you have multiple relations between two models. And in this case, it'll be important to disambiguate by specifying names for each relation.
Yeah. And so I can go ahead and change some stuff in the schema. So if I wanted let's say a JSON field like metadata, I can do, I think it's a JSON type. Maybe it's lowercase. Yeah. And then we have the new field over here, metadata, which is JSON.
That's neat.
Yeah, and it supports like I don't have a thing that like shows off the primary key or like an ID. I might add that in the future if I'm feeling up to it. But I do support, like, as you can see, bringing the default values alongside the name and the type.
That looks really awesome, Michael. Great work.
Thanks. And
so
then,
I
course,
dropped. Go ahead.
And then, of course, there's the copy link functionality, which I took inspiration from the TypeScript playground actually, where it just
right. So it saves the entire state of the like of the Prismaliser, and then just like saves it in the URL, and you can share it with someone else.
And of course, you can just paste in this one I actually did for showing off the new copy link stuff, and it's just like a tweet to user thing.
That is great. I love it. I love it, and I'm definitely going to use it.
Thanks.
All right. Do you have any more features planned for this, Michael?
Yeah, I actually got a couple. I actually have a roadmap on the GitHub.
Okay, so it's open source, right?
Yeah, it's fully open source because how I got into programming was through open source software, and so like my whole philosophy is sort of like giving back, I guess. And I mean, it's just kind of easier to open source stuff, I think. It's just like less effort with leaking stuff and all that. And it's just like the default thing. So why not, pretty much. So yeah, it's all available on GitHub. It's super simple install. You just install build start using Next.js. And yeah, so at the bottom I have this roadmap. So I'm planning to have like saving states into local history. And I'm actually have this idea of saving them into a GitHub gist as well.
Nice.
So that you can share them between machines or like just send this file off. And like this one, the sharing the links was planned, but I never got around to doing that until recently. And then there's some other just like UX sort of stuff, like saving node positions, because I don't have that saved currently. So when you try to reload a page, it'll get stuck in the same place, which is a bit annoying. And then, of course, adding that to the copy link stuff. But that's a bit of a thing that I need to delve into because I think the API for that is a bit weird in React Flow. I haven't taken a look at that in a while. And autocomplete, I probably might never do because Monaco is just this huge thing, and I don't really feel up to doing that a lot. But I mean, it's open source for a reason.
All right, you've heard it, folks. If you want this project to progress, then you can go and jump in and help Michael out here.
I think also an interesting feature would be sort of once you've sort of arranged the different models into the different nodes, would be sort of capturing the image and then maybe downloading that, if that makes sense. But anyway, as a user, we usually ask for a lot of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's an interesting thought. Maybe.
All right, Michael, anything else you want to tell our viewers before we finally let you go to sleep?
Not really. I guess just like if you want to sort of catch up with anything that I have planned in the future, of course, follow me on Twitter and GitHub at OVERS. It's a weird name, but it's unique. So, but yeah, I do have some stuff sort of planned in the far future that are pretty cool, but can't really divulge any info on that. But it's just watch your timelines, I guess. Yeah.
All right. Then thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to drop your Twitter in the comments as well so that everybody can go directly and follow you there. And yeah, thanks again for joining us and for staying up late, Michael. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to be here.
All right.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Wow. What a nice person and what a great tool. That was a great demo, and I'm certainly going to use this in the future. I often have the need that I very quickly, very spontaneously need to visualize a Prisma schema. For example, when I have users that have an issue with their schema and they share like 5 models with 50 fields, and it's super hard to get an overview what this even is about. then this kind of tool will be super helpful to just drop in the models and have a quick understanding of what the structure of these models actually is. So very, very useful.
I agree.
All right. Let's not make our next guest wait too long and bring her on right away, I would say. And then in the end, we can wrap up by talking about the Serverless Data Conf. So here is Lucy. Welcome to the stream.
Hi, good to be here.
Hi, welcome, Lucy. I think you've been with us for about 2.5 weeks now, giving our docs the love and care that they deserve, because the docs are one of the most important things in a product, really. So could you just share with us a little bit of your background?
Sure, yeah. So previously I was actually working as a developer. So I've been thinking for quite a while about making this transition to technical writing, but this is the first time I've been doing technical writing full time. So my previous job was a Java developer. I was working quite an interesting domain, actually. I was working on desktop software for the mission control center that communicates with weather satellites. So
oh, wow.
It's quite an unusual field. The actual software I was writing was much more kind of run-of-the-mill. We were writing a sort of something like project management software almost, but for planning weather satellite missions. So yeah, that's where I was coming from. The whole Node.js and TypeScript are all fairly new to me. I've done a little bit of playing around with JavaScript for small web projects, but it's all lots of interesting new stuff to learn.
For sure.
Indeed, that sounds really exciting. Also intimidating to some extent, but I hope you feel at home right here. Yeah, at Prisma.
No, it's really interesting. I've always liked writing, and so I've been often fiddling around with kind of side projects to do with blogging and so on. So I've got little bits of exposure to kind of JavaScript, but it's going to be interesting to learn more.
Nice.
Awesome.
And there is actually a little bit of an interesting parallel with our previous docs writer, Martina, who had been with us for, I think, 1.5 years, and who also had been on the stream, I think, initially when at some point when, like, not immediately when she joined, because we started the stream later, but like she was here, and she previously worked with .NET applications. So not quite Java, but I think that Java and .NET do have some similarities. Yes. And she was also kind of new in the Node.js ecosystem.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's interesting. My job before that was a mix of Java and .NET web applications. So I've done more Java, but I have also done a bit of C# and as well.
All right.
Interesting. Seems like there's a pattern. Indeed. Yeah. Anyway, on to the next question. Why did you decide to join Prisma?
So, I mean, one of the things I really liked is how it seems like the docs is very embedded in everything. It seems like lots of people are writing docs. Sometimes it's kind of an afterthought that you sort of rush something out at the end and it's not really very connected with how the development part of the workflow. But it seems like lots of developers are involved in writing docs, and I can see from all the pull requests that obviously, because it's open source, lots of people are contributing to that. So that's all really nice. And just it was very friendly. Everyone was very helpful and friendly in the kind of interview process, which is always nice. So that was all good, really.
Great to hear.
Yeah. And finally, what are you most excited about Prisma in the next few months?
So yeah, like from a personal point of view, because I'm so new to tech writing, I'm just sort of looking forward to kind of immersing myself in what's going on and learning as much as possible. I was talking today we're talking about how we're going to work with the product teams so that we basically learn about what's coming out as it goes, and so I can start to learn about how we can get documentation out, hopefully at the same time as with the release and all of that. So yeah, looking forward to learning more about how everything works.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I think that wraps up. Thank you for being a part of the stream.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks, Lucy. And we'll see you on Slack.
Yeah, see you later.
Bye-bye. All right, our docs team is shaping up. That's really nice to see. And we have a new strong addition to that. That's always great.
Yeah.
All right, Alex, before we wrap up, I think we have one more topic that we want to cover. And before we do that, a quick reminder for folks to drop your questions on in the comments so that we can address them at the end of the stream, which is coming very soon. So do it now. All right, for the last part of today's stream, I'm going to share my screen again. Here it goes. And what we're talking about is the Prisma Serverless Data Conference that is going to happen on November 18th. You can register and find all the info on prisma.io/serverless. So here's where you can drop in your email. And once you drop in your email, you get your personal ticket that you can share on social media to let all of your circles know that you are joining us. What is planned for the Prisma Serverless Data Conference? What is this all about? So the reason why we're doing this conference is because we are really getting excited about the topic of serverless in general, and because a lot of our users want to use Prisma in serverless environments. A lot of these have been running into troubles, though, in the past when they wanted to use Prisma, for example, in AWS Lambda, in serverless functions, where it's not so easy to manage database connections, for example, when you use a traditional database like Postgres or MySQL. It's not straightforward to manage the connections, reuse the connections in these kinds of environments. That's why we are building the Prisma Data Platform with the first product, the Prisma Data Proxy. And we are now bringing together the serverless data, the serverless community at the Serverless Data Conference. Wow, I don't think I've said serverless that many times in such a short time.
We should have a counter for that, for everything.
Exactly. Play the serverless bingo here, folks.
Yeah.
We have speakers from MongoDB, from Cloudflare, from Netlify, PlanetScale, Cockroach, and from Vercel. And of course, also some speakers from Prisma. In fact, you and I, Alex, we are both going to appear in the keynote where we are going to talk about the current state of the Prisma Data Platform and also the upcoming plans of it.
Yes.
So yeah, everybody remember to claim your free ticket and join us at the conference in almost 2 weeks. So in fact, it's happening in 2 weeks. Oh, we might have to skip the next What's New in Prisma live stream then, because it's actually happening at the same day, I guess. But
I think it's immediately after What's New in Prisma is the Serverless conference.
It's on Thursday. Okay.
Yes.
But then the countdown doesn't line up for me, at least. Well, we'll see. I don't actually know how it's going to work out, how it's going to play out in practice. All right. That is it for today, my friends. This was a rather short and sweet episode. We don't have any questions in the chat, so really all we have to say is goodbye and see you all in 2 weeks.
Awesome.